My name is Lisa Shea Munt. This is Amber Hart, and we are the Pulse of GovCon. The Pulse is a market intelligence firm that specializes in empowering government contractors by providing them with the market intelligence they need for their business development, capture, and proposal efforts. And that's about as much as I can vamp until our slides get up here.
Well, we can talk about why we're.
Here we go. All right. So we are here to be talking about GWACs, MACs, and BICs, and we call it Oh My, because there is a lot to discuss. And so before we get started, we always just put in a legal disclaimer. If you receive our research, our information, just please don't reproduce it, resell it, etc.
We don't make any money off of it, so.
It's true. I already told you a little bit about who we are, but today is not about us. So what we are here to do today is provide you context. Amber and I are firm believers in laying the foundation of what some of these definitions mean in government contracting that we use every day. You know, especially we all know for something like GWAC, BIC, MAC, MAS, FSS, it can become very, you keep using that word, I don't think it means what you think it means. And so that's what we want to start with today, is some definitions. So just so we're all on the same page. A GWAC is a task order or delivery order contract for information technology, products and services established by the agency for government-wide use. It's right there in the name, just like with a lot of government contracting terms. GWACs are also governed by the Clinger-Cohen Act, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit, and it provides inter-agency access. Now, we're going to be referring to the terms inter and intra access a bunch through our presentation. Inter is for something between two or more things, and intra is something happening within the same group.
You didn't know you were coming to class today,
That's, I'm teacher, so that's how we have to torque it. Internet for everyone, intranet for your own company. That's a good way to think of it. Now, we get to BICs, best-in-class contracts. And this is a designation made by OMB for contracts that have met key criteria because of their maturity in data sharing processes and practices. And we're also going to be referencing category management as an initiative because BICs are a really good tool that's really critical to meeting the category management initiatives. Now, just to further complicate things, it's not just GWACs and BICs. You also have the term MAC. That is a multi-agency contract, and that's not to be confused with a multiple award contract. Guy pointed that out to me the other day when I had that written out there. People could conflate the two terms, and they're very different. So a multi-agency contract is very similar to a GWAC. In fact, it's almost the exact same thing in a lot of ways. It's also an inter-agency contract. This one in particular was governed in 1932 by the Economy Act, and they are authorized to acquire a variety of supplies and services. So they are not limited to IT the same way that GWACs were, and they are also not subject to the economy, no, GSA MACs are not subject to the Economy Act, excuse me. We'll talk about that in the timeline in a couple of slides. And then, just to add one more, there are IDIQs, but not just any IDIQs, because an IDIQ is obviously looking for undefined quantity for delivery over a set period of time. But we have typical intra-agency IDIQs, and then we have inter-agency IDIQs. So an intra-IDIQ is very reminiscent of any sort of contract that a particular agency puts out that can only be used by that agency. So they're used, again, when you cannot predetermine above a specified minimum the precise quantities or supplies during the POP, but they are restricted within that awarding agency versus being able to be leveraged by other agencies. Now, like I mentioned before, other relevant terms include MAS and FSS, but we're not really going to get into that right now. Instead, what we're going to do is this wild slide.
We're going to talk about geometry.
That I put together. So now, bear with me, okay? We agonized over trying to figure out an analogy, a metaphor, something to show how everything was interconnected. And we couldn't do it. We talked about stores. We talked about brands. We were trying to make everything connect. And so instead, I wanted us to today think of these terms like geometry. And now there is a disclaimer that Lisa got C's in math.
I got D's in math.
So not necessarily the people that you want to be talking about, different types of angles, the Pythagorean theorem, or anything of that nature. So instead, we can also just frame it as I have a 2.5-year-old. We can talk about shapes. So you'll see at the bottom, we have the GWAC, which I am equating to the rhombus. In math, all sides are equal and the opposite sides are parallel. We have the MAC, which is a rectangle. In math, all angles are 90 degrees and the opposite sides are parallel. Now, both a GWAC and a MAC can be a BIC. And by this, from the math perspective, we have...
When she walked me through it, I sat down on the ground. I was like, all right.
Follow me, follow me. A BIC is the square. It's a quadrilateral, but it's the pinnacle. It's kind of the same as a rhombus and a rectangle, but it's just a little bit better. It meets all the criteria and the definition of the GWAC and the MAC, but then a little bit extra because it has, all equal sides and all angles are 90 degrees. Now, again, just to add further definition confusion, multiple award schedules, the MAS/federal supply schedules, which can be used interchangeably, can also be BICs. Now, over here you have, so the rhombus and the rectangle too, they can connect from a math perspective because although a GWAC is for IT services, it is a MAC just for those IT services. So in math, a rhombus is actually a special case of a rectangle. So that's how I made that work.
Fun fact for the day.
Just in case you wanted to know.
This is not a government contracting.
Now it's just a math lesson. And then on the opposite side, an intra-agency IDIQ, that's a circle. It's still a shape, but it's not a quadrilateral, and no amount of manipulation can make it into a square just by definition. It can't be a BIC. And now before, again, you tell me that, yes, the Pythagorean theorem can find angles within a circle and all that, that's...
Can't fit a square into a round.
You can't fit a square into a round. So we need to just track the metaphor. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is not just to be a ridiculous human being. It's that these terms, they get conflated, and for good reason. It's because it's confusing. What is what in what case? And a lot of what we preach at the Pulse of GovCon is, it depends, which is such an unsatisfying answer. But hopefully this crazy little slide here gave you some giggles and a little bit of education on how it all interconnects. So then, if we have all of these terms, what's the timeline? What came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the GWAC, the MAC, or the BIC? Well, here is the history. Here's the timeline. So this is 1932 through 2012, and then we get into 2014 on the next slide. So the Economy Act created the MACs, and that was in 1932. So in terms of trying to figure out what term came first, it was that one. And that was authorized interagency acquisition just in the first place. Then in 1996, we have the Klinger-Cohen Act. I said that that was what governed the GWACs. And so that was a combination of the IT Management Reform Act and the Federal Acquisition Reform Act. At that point, only certain agencies were able to use GWACs, but that has since changed from this initial list. GWACs categorized as a high-risk government function. That was in 2005. People said, whoa, 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 we have these things, but people aren't necessarily trained to leverage the vehicle, so we have to reassess. And then in 2012, we had the Improving Acquisition Through Strategic Sourcing memo under the Obama administration and OFPP. And then sort of GWACs as we know it occurred in 2014. So I mentioned before about category management. In 2014, OFPP under OMB announced this initiative, which is also not new. It was a sort of iteration of the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative. So if you ever want to really go back in time for category management, you have to look up FSSI. And the idea was that we wanted to streamline and manage categories of spending across the government so that we acted more as a single enterprise. Now, both these initiatives, they had the same goals. It was for savings, to decrease redundancy, and improve general business intelligence, all while meeting or exceeding the small business and sustainability goals.
Yeah.
And then we have, just further with the history, under category management, GWACs and MACs, that's really the motivating force to the utilization of the BICs. And so we have here, BICs have this little crown on them, right? They are the king.
On the Iron Throne.
On the Iron Throne. And because they are the ones that sort of reign supreme. And not only are they reigning supreme, the Game of Thrones metaphor, if you're tracking that, is also this idea of consolidation. They are the king of what, the Seven Kingdoms, the Andals, the First Men. That's sort of how BICs are too. It's this sort of over-encompassing effort for consolidation. And so this idea was consolidating these requirements into a limited number of preferred government-wide contracts. Now, I'm probably sitting here saying, which ones are BICs?
This was ridiculous.
Well, yeah, of course, but what are BICs and how do I find them? And this is something that we hear a lot, and also something that's kind of largely up for debate. Some people will be dead fast and say, no, this contract that I am on, it's a GWAC, it's a vehicle, it's a MAC, it's something, and it is a best in class. And that's not entirely true. So if anybody's ever actually Googled best-in-class contracts, you might have been looking for an exhaustive list. And I gotta tell you, the search engine optimization on that bad boy,
not good.
Not good. What you're gonna find is this list from 2019. And the list says, this is from 2019. So always check the acquisition gateway. So this is a little screenshot here, and just, if you need to learn anything from today, it's how to see how the government defines BICs and which ones are BICs. Go to Acquisition Gateway, Solution Finder, filter GovWide Initiative by Best in Class, and you will get that list. Now, as I mentioned before, not every GWAC, MAC, MAS, et cetera, is a BIC. So some popular ones that people have access to that are not BICs include Navy Seaport Next Gen, GSA PSS, GSA Polaris, which is obviously still an active bid, the VA's T4NG, and DOJ's ITES 5. And now Amber is going to be talking through some popular BICs.
Do you want to take a seat?
No.
After all that?
No. I'm a math teacher now.
Right. So we're going to be hearing a lot from some government folks that are going to discuss a lot of these vehicles that are upcoming or the ones that they're running. So we're going to leave it a lot to them to kind of cover what the future looks like. But what we wanted to give everyone was a level set on where these vehicles are. But for the sake of our sanity and for yours and what you just saw of the first 5 slides, is we're just going to focus on the numbers and the rest of this discussion to some of the GWACs and MACs that are only designated as BICs. So as Lisa mentioned, there might be a few that we're leaving out here. That's because they haven't been designated as BICs. So we're just going to walk through a little bit of the numbers, but these slides will be provided to the group afterwards. So if you have any questions, let us know. The first is the GSA 8A Stars 3 award that was recently made. This is the 3rd generation of an 8A set-aside vehicle that is extremely popular. It does have a ceiling of $50 billion, and there are over 1,000 vendors on it. As of earlier this month, spending on that vehicle has been about $540 million, with over 419 task orders that have been disseminated across it. But the top agency buyer right now on GSA 8A Stars 3 is the Treasury IRS. We've also included in here a little bit about what the scope is. It's an IT vehicle because it is a GWAC, so it's all IT related requirements such as data management, IT and communications, software, and systems design. We also include the top buyers up here that look like, as I mentioned, IRS, FDA, CBP, and FEMA as well. And we included some of the top vendors, which actually might be sitting in this room that might be a good people to team with and to talk to if you're looking to utilize that vehicle. People like Appleton, Synergist, Broadleaf, and Cyber Security Innovations. If you're on this list, please wave to everyone for teaming opportunities. Anyone on this list in here? Okay.
You took a gamble.
I did. I'm going to keep taking that gamble. Okay, next one we're going to talk about is NASA SOUP 5, which I believe Joanne is here and she is speaking. She's run a wonderful vehicle. This is one of the best actually in class in my opinion. But it has over a $20 billion ceiling with 142 vendors. As of earlier this month, about $44.8 billion has been spent across this vehicle with over 1,031 task orders issued. Top agency buyer right now on NASA SOUP is actually the VA. And this is a small and large business vendor vehicle with socioeconomic designations as well. And scope looks like commercial IT products and services, including installation, maintenance, and other services like that. Other top vendors are Thundercat Technologies, Emergent 4 Points Technology, and Carasoft Technology. Ta-da! Okay, a few more that we're going to go through is HHS COSP3, which I'm sure no one in this room wants to even talk about COSP4, so we won't get into it. But right now, the ceiling, the the period of performance goes until this year. We'll see what happens with that. With the total ceiling of $20 billion, over 57 vendors, with $15.6 billion spent thus far underneath that vehicle, and the top agency buyer is HHS. And something I want to point out about the vehicles that we're about to go through on this slide and the next is the period of performance may be 2022, but a lot of them go until about 2028 for task orders. So that doesn't exactly mean that everything stops under that vehicle come the end of this year. But a little bit more about COSP3. Top agency buyers, obviously, you know, HHS, Department of Education, Department of Health Agency, Navy, Army, VA, DISA, and so on and so forth. Again, top vendors kind of look like your big boys that you see driving down the Beltway. We have Deloitte, Booz Allen, Perspective, CGI, and Accenture being the top vehicle users for that COSP3. Then we move to GSA Vets 2. Which is good until next year as well, with a ceiling of $5 billion. So we're really walking it down now with that one. 70 vendors on that, with $926 million spent under that vehicle. So we've gone from million, and that's not billions, it's millions spent under that vehicle, with 175 task orders only issued under this vehicle.
Amber has feelings about vets.
I do, but that's another day. With Army being one of the top agency buyers. This is a second generation vehicle with that is an SDVOSB only set aside, hence the reason vets is in the name. Again, an IT vehicle with IT requirements. Top agency buyers look a lot like the DoD, as well as throwing in Treasury, Department of Energy in there, and USDA kind of for a little bit of a different type of mix. But again, a few top vendors on there as well. Anyone in this room? I'm going to take another gamble. Anyone a Vets 2 holder in here?
Okay.
Wow. All right. Okay. Good for you. Okay. So moving on to HHS CIOCS, which also is a GWAC, which is good until 2025. A ceiling of $20 billion as well, with 66 vendors currently holding a hunting license there. $3.4 billion has been obligated against this vehicle thus far, with over 13,000 task orders. Yes, 13,000 task orders. And the top agency buyer is obviously HHS. Again, a lot of the vendors on here kind of look like when you're driving down the Beltway with Thundercat, Vion, New Tech Solutions, 4 Points Technology, so on and so forth. And this is also an OEM and VAR vehicle with small and large vendors.
Right.
Okay.
And you don't usually hear people talk about that one.
No, that one's like a little hidden.
Yeah.
Little fun little gem there. Okay, a few more to go through. We have GSA Alliant 2. Again, we're not going to talk about Alliant 2 small business because there's feelings there. I know there's people in this room that also have feelings.
That was sad.
But Alliant 3 is getting worked on standing up. If you missed it this week, a draft RFP was released, I guess the other week technically now because it's Friday. So if you missed the draft RFP, that has been released. So they are working on standing up Alliant 3 now. But this, we're talking about the second generation vehicle here. The scope is basically IT services, where the world is your IT oyster. You can basically buy whatever kind of services or IT help you need underneath there. Your top vendors through that look like CACI, Booz, GovCIO, Deloitte, Accenture, Peraton, and Perspecta. This one has about 493 task orders issued against it, with $12 billion being spent and about 41 vendors across it, but DHS being one of the largest buyers. A few more to get to. We have COSP3 small business. We kind of already talked about COSP3 large business, so we'll kind of skip over that. But that looks about the same, about $11 billion being spent, over 2,000 task orders issued, with 344 vendors, HHS being the top buyer. And then there's GSA Oasis, which is kind of the shining star of all of this, which is currently being looked at as being recompeted as Oasis Plus, which used to be BICMAC, which I liked a lot more. I think we all did. It was fun. They got rid of it because they're no fun. But it's for complex professional services. Now, what does complex professional services mean? You tell us. Not quite sure, but this is. Oh, yeah.
But GSA can tell us.
Yeah, there we go. You will be able to tell us. So there is about 150 vendors on this vehicle, with $32.3 billion being spent across this vehicle. This is one of the shining stars of GSA's crown jewel. It is a very popular and successful vehicle, with over 1,000 task orders being issued, and Army being one of the largest vendors. But as you can see on the top agency list and agency buyers, it really does range from defense to civilian as usage. Okay. Few more. is Oasis Small Business. Again, very popular vehicle. Air Force is actually the largest buyer under Oasis Small Business, with over 2,000 task orders being issued, $22 billion being spent, and 507 vendors being on the list. And again, really ranges the gamut in buyers, so for those complex professional services. Then we talk about the GSA Oasis 8A MAC, which was added on after, during COVID, to kind of support those kind of quick needs, as well as giving a place to add it, so it was started in 2020, and it is good until 2029, with 118 vendors on it and $417 million being spent across that just since 2020, with 159 task orders, and Homeland Security being one of the biggest buyers as well. And it is worth noting that Oasis did up their ceiling when that happened as well. We're going to talk about HCATs. If you're not familiar with HCATs, it's actually a training vehicle that I find that not a lot of people talk about as well. It's a little bit of a hidden one, but it has a ceiling of $11.5 billion. So if you're in the human capital management or the training area, this is actually a really good vehicle to be on that not a lot of people talk about. 52 vendors, $620 million spent thus far on across 109 task orders, and again, Homeland Security being one of the biggest buyers. And as we can imagine with training, OPM, Air Force, USAID, Department of Labor, one of the biggest buyers as well.
I hope everybody also noticed that the ones that are not labeled IT services are called MACs and not GWACs.
This is true.
This is, in real time.
This is true. So HCAT Small Business MAC is one of the, it's another really popular vehicle. Same thing, human capital and training services. Homeland Security is one of the biggest buyers, $315 million being spent, so a lot lower than the large business or unrestricted vehicle. Then talking about HCAT's 8A, same thing, kind of got stood up in 2020 to support the pandemic and those needs and kind of quicker spending, $52 million being spent there, 20 task orders issued, 36 holders, HHS being one of the largest ones as well of buyers. And then last but certainly not least is the GSA BMO, because we've been talking about IT services, we've been talking about complex professional services. BMO is a little bit different. It's building, maintenance, and operations. So if you're in that side of the realm as well, but that's construction services, inspection, and facilities maintenance. DHS being one of the largest buyers, same with Air Force, Treasury, and EPA. $27 billion ceiling, 33 vendors, only $96 million spent across 92 task orders.
And that's only some of the BICs. There's
only some of them.
Yes.
So we're going to talk quickly about the impact across the ecosystem, and then we'll get to Ross. I know we're coming up on it. But over the last 6 years, we have seen a move to consolidate federal procurement pathways under that category management initiative, as Lisa touched on. And there's some really good things that are coming out of it, and there's some things that are really impacting industry that we're going to have to see how it shakes out. First is cost savings. OMB reported the federal government has saved $27.3 billion in the past 3 years, so that's a plus for everyone's tax dollars. There is increased requirements bundling. Since the process has become more focused on the contracting process, the approach to defining the requirements has kind of broken down a little bit over the procurement life cycle is what we've really seen here, as well as less access. We're on this side of the table, more access for us is really good, right? More transparency, more data, more understanding of the spending. But BICs kind of minimize the channels for acquisition and reduce the lanes where contractors can supply services and products. GSA is working to kind of remedy that with things like Polaris, Oasis Plus, for including a little bit more of that on-ramping periods, as well as making it a little bit more flexible. But previously, the on-ramping was really put off for about 10 years. So if you didn't have access to those vehicles, then it was really hard for you to get now, and growth was really hard. So that's a little bit of access in the federal government. Market and industry. One of the biggest ones that I know Ross writes a lot about is the consolidation of the market.
Right.
So vendors have been, fewer and fewer vendors have been successful in accessing, competing, and remaining in the market since the shift to BICs. We can kind of see this in the data since around 2012. This little fun thing, if you've ever seen it from War on the Rocks, is a lot of the defense contractors and how they consolidate basically into 5 main organizations. So if you've never checked that out, but that's interesting. But this actually is from Washington Technology as well. kind of show the deals by the market. But what we're seeing is a lot of consolidation firms that are under 1,000, vendors really kind of coming together either through private equity or being bought up so that bigger companies can go ahead and access a little bit more revenue and grow, since it's becoming harder.
And this has a lot of impact on the small business community, as you testified in front of the House Small Business Committee in June on how category management, best-in-class contracts actually was limiting the competition. You know, you saw more small business spending dollars go up, but then actual independent vendors going down.
Absolutely. And across the sectors, more than 400 deals have been announced in 2021, up more than 55% from 257 deals in 2020 and 83% in 2020 and 2019. So it is increasing. Everyone's being bought. I'm sure half this room has probably been acquired or been a part of that at one point. So for government contractors, a little bit more about the impact across the ecosystem. As we talked about, less access. It is very much, is it biggest in class or best in class? That's something that we talk about as well, as teaming, JVing, and mentor protege has become vitally important to compete across these contracts. Increased bottom line, you know, to compete against these things, it takes a lot of dollars, right? And a lot of work in this room, and I'm sure everyone here understands that. As well as small businesses who, as we talked about, there's been a major decline on small business vendor utilization across BICs. So let's talk about the future a little bit. And like I said, we're going to kind of leave this to the professionals that are way above our pay grade to talk about these. But in around current events, GSA is actually creating a little bit more options in the mix with Alliant 3, with the draft RFP that was released on the 21st. Again, if you have not seen that, please check it out. And please provide comments to them. It's a really good, it's helpful. It's not due until January 6th.
It's so important. We had somebody the other day say, well, you know, I feel precluded from going after these because you see some of the requirements come out, and how can we make a difference? And that's how you can make a difference.
Absolutely.
You can respond to the drafts. You can make your, you know, issues known in advance of it dropping.
Absolutely. Polaris, I'm sure everyone either has put in their proposal or is working on putting in their proposal. And then Oasis Plus, again, Big Mac in my heart, I love it, is a follow-on to the successful Oasis vehicle. Also, NASA is advertising their SOUP 6th generation for their vehicle and holding a reverse industry day on November 15th, which should be really, really good. Again, a little bit more for those policy wonks, things to look at. I won't bore you with these and walk through them, but there are things where it's moving the pricing and competition from the umbrella level, which is the bigger, you giving pricing during competition, but actually moving it down to the task order level, and that's where kind of the pricing competition happens. And then kind of reviewing category management best practices to boost opportunities for socially disadvantaged small businesses is a really big move as well. A few other for aid business development programs and JVs have been acting, but it's a very active space right now.
And of course, we can't just give you data with no way to use it. So we always like to talk about how you can actually capitalize the data that we've provided, because we don't want it to go in one ear and out the other. So, you know, we just wanted you guys through this presentation to understand the difference in not only the definitions, but in the types of contracts. What we see from a lot of small businesses is this need that we see the hot new contract on the street, the hot new GWAC, and they want to be a part of it. And when they come to us to help them go after it, we always say, okay, well, why? Do you need every hot contract that hits the streets? Does it fit in with your scopes and services, your strategic goals for the future? You know, don't just collect these to have them, because if you do that, then number two, they sit dusty on your shelf. And that's something that we're always trying to preach. It's not enough to get on-ramped onto one of these GWACs, these MACs, these BIC contracts, because if you can't leverage them, if you don't have a task order response cell or the infrastructure to be able to actually go after the task orders, then it just ends up being a participation trophy. And just because you have access to it doesn't mean it's going to make you any money if you don't know how to leverage it. And so how do you leverage it? Well, we like to say that you need to push new work to the ones that you do hold. It needs to be part of your sales effort and your sales engine. You need to know your buyers, your customers, who uses what, and it really needs to be part of your sales effort and your marketing to increase visibility to those people that you are trying to access. And that's it. Ta-da! You did it.
You want it?
Should I take it?
You can have it.
Should I
Otherwise,
take it?
I'm done
Okay.
with it.
All right.
It's going to get lost.
Just going to put it right here. I had questions about CIO SP4 plan
Did
for
you?
us. Yeah. But we won't
Okay.
touch that. Okay. So we'll start in reverse order, right? Impact on small businesses of this, and let's just call it what it is, right? It's never going to be a perfect balance between what's best for the government and what's best for the industry. And if one had 100% willpower over the other, that would cause a lot of problems that we don't have enough time to go over. Second to that, GWACs are just one of several pressure points that are causing impacts on small businesses. But let's just start with kind of this. They've worked for some, but not for many. And I'm wondering what thoughts you have on what kind of circuit breaker actions you think could work to ease the pressure and the burden that's on small businesses.
Yeah, I mean, you say some work for some and not for many. You know, one of my biggest examples is with COSP4. I know I'm saying the thing that we just said we weren't going to talk about.
He who shall not be named.
Yes, exactly. There's so much appetite to get onto COSP4 from an IT technology sort of perspective, right? But really the original intent was for healthcare IT. And that sort of got, for lack of a better word, bastardized with the last iteration of this, because it really changed from its initial intent of the scope to be more opening and accommodating, but then that in turn just kind of went against the idea of this decreased competition, and then everybody and their mom was going after it too.
All thanks to all people.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think just being really dedicated in purposeful in the scope of some of these GWACs and MACs is what's going to be most helpful to industry, so that you don't have the opportunity to sort of finagle your way. I mean, I knew companies that were like, how can I make my IT story sound more healthcare IT so I can get those points? Yeah. And it was, but you're not doing that. There are just sort of these loopholes that they were leveraging to get onto it.
You're not telling your authentic
You're not your
story
authentic
about
self.
yourself.
Your authentic self. No. And they have things, you know, especially under some of the requirements, if you look at them, where it's construction is one of the ancillary support services. What does construction have to do with IT? I mean, I'm sure there's IT in construction, okay. But like, you all know what I'm saying. So it's, you know, it's one of those more focused vehicles where if you want more of a focused vendor set and you're not, right, it's always the choice of quality over quantity. And I think we and the government need to make a decision of which one we want. And right now we're focusing on quantity.
And you talk about how, Ross, how it is different between what government wants and needs and what industry would prefer to have. And you know, the Pulse is actually working an effort right now where we are going through hundreds and thousands of lines of contract data for software and cloud spending from FY13 to now, just to analyze it. And what we're finding is, yeah, that's exhausting. For software, seeing two sort of actions against one type of company or brand, and it just, so tracking that when you could have just gotten it through a consolidated means, we can see that as being beneficial for the government, but not so much for the government contractor, where if you are that mom and pop shop, you want to have access to that type of contract and can't otherwise.
I'm fascinated by this idea of no pricing at the master level of some of these contract vehicles, because usually I can find somebody in the public sector ecosystem to complain about something. That's just my job as a journalist, right?
Is it hard?
Right. So, I have not found one person in the public sector ecosystem that said no pricing at the master level and pushing it down to the task order level is a bad idea. Have not found one. Because
it's pushing off the inevitable, one. And two, it makes sense, especially in this world we are today. I think especially if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, labor categories are always differing. The labor market, what that market looks like at that certain time. I'm sure any recruiter or staffing pod within a company would tell you that it's almost impossible to ask a company to put a ceiling on something
for 10 years.
For 10 years is just not feasible, and I think everyone's learning that now. Or even the price of products, or if you're an OEM or a VAR as well, and locking them in to where they can't compete. What I think the intention more is a lot of bigger vendors, are the ones that are growing, are seeing that they don't need to do that, and it's also making vendors that are maybe in the commercial sector not want to come to the government sector, because they realize that's not good business. And it's, so it is a little bit of a little push and pull between industry and government, where the government main goal outside of meeting their mission is to decrease risk and make sure that they're getting what they're paying for and it's efficiently spent. You know, we as industry need to sometimes understand that's the main goal. Where industry's goal is to make money and business, and it's a revenue and
support the mission.
And support the and support the mission. So it's a hard balance, but you know, locking someone in, I think over the past 4 years, we've seen that that's just impossible to do.
Any questions from the audience? We have microphones going around.
I have a comment.
Comment? Yes. And yes.
So I know you guys, my name's Ellis Khan from Moss Contracting. I know you guys kind of made a case about maybe not going after some of these IDIQs because it doesn't fit in your lane. But if you go back and look at the task orders under CISP 3, majority of them were not health IT.
Absolutely,
Right,
that's what
exactly.
we were just saying. That's the hard part, right? That's the case in point. Absolutely.
Question on task orders. Is it just us and our observation at WT and those of us that cover it? Or are these task orders getting larger, more bundled,
Yeah.
more consolidated, more complicated?
Yeah,
What does that mean?
And that's not just an observation. There actually is data behind it. SAM.gov, for all of its challenges, does have a report that you can run on the increase of bundled and consolidated requirements. And you can see the numbers, how they go up. So no, that's not just a seeing it thing. That is an actual data thing as well. And that is occurring. As we mentioned, with these vehicles, it's a lot easier to kind of put them all together as one task order and compete them. You know, like we said, biggest in class or best in class, you tell us.
What are you looking forward to hearing from our next panel to tee that up?
Oh, don't make us choose.
I mean, just the opinions, ways to leverage it, kind of tricks of the market.
What's
certainly.
coming up. I think it's really interesting to hear industry's perspective, and I love how you guys do the industry perspective and then you have the government perspective, because right, we're all coming from two different sides, and to see, you know, there's three sides of every story, right?
But government, please know that our perspective is coming from a place of love.
We love you.
My mother did teach me there's three sides to every
There
story.
is, of course.
Which is true. Thank you, Amber and Lisa.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.